He not only was a relevant character in the Old Covenant scriptures, he's relevant in the New Covenant, and he's used as an example of patience in the face of suffering. I probably mentioned this more than once, but most scholars believe the entire book of Job unfolded in the course of less than a year. And so although it was a horrible, horrible year, and he was suffering horrifically, perhaps as much as anybody we've ever read about, it was not the sum total of his life. Ultimately, the Lord brought about victory in his life, even in spite of this. So he was patient in the face of suffering, and his perseverance brought the Lord's, he persevered till the Lord broke through. And in Ezekiel, the Lord makes this comment about three men of righteousness. He says, even if these three men, Ezekiel 14:14, even if these three men, Noah, Daniel, and Job, were in the city, they could not save it only themselves, by their righteousness, declares the Lord. They couldn't save the city. They could only save themselves by their righteousness. Verse 20, as surely as I live, declares the sovereign Lord, even if Noah, Daniel, and Job were in it, they could neither save son nor daughter. They would save only themselves by their righteousness. And so this righteousness of Job was remembered by the prophet Ezekiel in two different quotes, of course, under the anointing of the Holy Spirit. Now, before we open up the book itself, the traditional author of the book of Job is Moses, but it's not really known. It's not definitive who the author was. Moses is the most frequent candidate that's mentioned, but it could well have been someone we don't know beyond the someone who's out of our reach historically. We don't have their name. Hi, Bill. So look in Genesis chapter 36. This is in the midst of the accounts of the patriarchs. In Genesis 36, the descendants of Esau are listed. And of course, Esau was Jacob's brother. And, Esau was Isaac's brother. And so one of the ones that's mentioned in verse 10 of chapter 36 is Eliphaz. It says Esau, these are the names of Esau's sons. Eliphaz is mentioned. In the book of Job in chapter 2, we meet a guy called Eliphaz the Timnite. So he could have been named for this Eliphaz. He could have been this Eliphaz. So it's possible this is one of Job's three friends. And it goes on in verse 11, and the sons of Eliphaz were Timon, and the one in Job is referred to as Eliphaz the Timonite. And then down in verse 31 of that same chapter, and these are the kings that reigned in the land of Edom, before there reigned any king over the children of Israel. And Bela, the son of Beor, reigned in Edom, and the name of this city was Dinhabah. And Bela died, and Jobab, the son of Zerah, reigned in his stead. So a number of scholars have put forth that this Jobab might be Job. He's mentioned as a king in chapter 36. But the main reason the authorship, you've often heard, I'm sure, that Job may be the oldest book in the Bible. The main reason is there's no mention of the patriarchs, there's no mention of Israel, there's no mention of Jews or Judaism, and the things that the rest of the Old Covenant refers to, the sacrificial system and so forth, is not in place. So if Moses was the author of the first 5 books, this could well have preceded Moses' writings because, of course, he got the law at Sinai and he wrote about what he got. And so if you're looking back in your notes, the traditional time of the writing is unknown, but it's generally believed from the context of it that the story played out somewhere between 2000 and 1500 BC. The Exodus was around 1500 BC, so sometime before the Exodus. The general content is historical narrative and poetry. The book of Job is Hebraic poetry. In English, it's still poetic, depending on the version that you use, but it's more poetic in Hebrew, I'm told, although I've never read it in Hebrew. It is, the book of Job is somewhat unique in that it's taught as ancient literature in a lot of universities, a lot of secular universities that don't teach the Bible will teach the book of Job as an example of ancient wisdom literature. And so they have different reasons for doing it, but they recognize it as ancient literature. You know, they don't recognize it as divinely inspired as we do, but they do recognize it as being a very, very ancient document. And the primary message of the book of Job, and I'll say this more than once in different ways too, seems to be that there's a lot going on behind the scenes that we don't know about. Because the story that plays out is never really explained to Job. It's explained to us as the readers. And we get kind of a glimpse behind the veil of some of the things that are taking place in the spirit realm. The ultimate message of Job is the devil messed him up and the Lord made him whole. And so there's an underlying theme about trusting the Lord, the sovereignty of God. He's working for our good. These things are all implicit, but there's no real clear explanation as to why sometimes bad things happen to good people. He just doesn't give the explanation. And so you can't make all your theology on healing or on tragedy from the book of Job, because you'll come up short. I've known people to try to use Job as their theology on healing, and it really doesn't work in light of the rest of the scriptures. So some key verses, we'll get to these as we go through the text. But Job 1:21, Job said, "Naked I came out of my mother's womb, and naked I shall return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." That's a refrain from one of the songs we sing, one of the current songs we sing on Sunday mornings a lot of times. And notice in Job 1:22, in all this Job sinned not, nor charged God foolishly. And then once again in Job 2:10, Job speaking to his wife, "Don't talk like a fool. If we accept blessings from God, we must accept troubles as well." In all that happened, Job never once said anything against God. So he didn't malign the Lord, although he certainly questioned why these bad things were happening to him, and he proclaimed his own innocence and so forth. So these notes are for you. There's a couple of quotes from other versions that I'll refer to. I'm not going to go strictly by the notes, but keep them handy, if you will, because there's a couple of different wordings that are really nice in some of these other versions. And by the way, I'm working with new glasses here, and they're a little bit different than what I've been working with. Hi. Good evening. How are y'all? Come on in. We're in the book of Job. Grab a set of those notes by the door on your way in. Set of notes right beside the door there. There you go. Get 2 sets. And so we're in the book of Job. We just start in chapter 1. I've just been talking about the background, so your timing's perfect. You might want to sit over here where you can spread stuff on the table. It's easier. That's why we set up the tables. There you go. Imagine that. You can tell it wasn't planned by the federal government. Okay, Job chapter 1. There was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job. That man was perfect or blameless and upright. He was one that feared God and shunned evil. There were born to him 7 sons and 3 daughters. His substance, now this verse 3 is how his wealth is reckoned. This verse 3 is one of the additional reasons, or one of the additional supports that gives rise to the idea that this is a very ancient book, because his wealth is reckoned according to animals and the possession of livestock, which was a very ancient way of tracking substance. His substance was 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 5 yoke of oxen, 500 she-asses, and a very great household, so that this man was the greatest of all the men of the East. And so he was the richest guy in the East. And so his sons went and feasted in their houses every day, and the 3 sisters went to eat with them. Verse 5, so it was when the days of their feasting were gone about that Job sent and sanctified them, it says in verse 5. Now this sanctified them, set them apart, consecrated them. He rose up early in the morning and offered burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said, it may be that my sons have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. Thus did Job continually. So just a little aside, I think that Job as a parent, had the right to bring his children before the Lord. I think you and I, as parents, have the right to bring our children before the Lord from a special place of authority. I'm not suggesting we can pray them out of hell or anything like that. However, Job offered sacrifices for them in an attempt to keep them brought into a right relationship with the Lord. So not only was he speaking into their lives, he was actively praying for them, and he was praying from a position of authority, as I think all parents have. So that's just verse 5 in chapter 1. Verse 6, now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. Now this sons of God is a reference that's used in various places. There's some, I won't say controversy, but there's some difference of opinion as to what it means, whether it means exclusively supernatural beings, whether it means them and redeemed men that are now on the other side. But whatever the case, notice the devil is there, and he's there in the guise of Satan, which in Hebrew is the accuser, Ha-Satan. He's there as Job's accuser among the sons of God, and he's required to present himself to God, which I think is kind of a neat thing, because obviously he's in a subordinate position. Verse 7, the Lord said to Satan, where are you coming from? Satan answered the Lord and said, from going to and fro in the earth and from walking up and down in it. Now there's an angelic order that appears in the book of Zechariah that gives this same explanation for where they've been, which is kind of interesting. The ones in Zechariah are good guys. This is obviously a bad guy. But the implication being that the fallen angels, the good angels, they're going to and fro in the earth about either business contrary to the Lord's will or business in favor of the Lord's will, and they ultimately have to go back and give an account to the Lord of their dealings. So the Lord said to him, have you considered my servant Job, that there's none like him in the earth, a perfect and upright man, one that fears God and eschews evil? That's kind of an obscure word, but shuns evil. Satan answered and says, does Job fear God for nothing? Have you not made a hedge about him and all of his house, so that all he has on every side you've blessed? You've blessed the work of his hands, and his substance has increased in the land. But now put forth your hand and touch what he has, and he'll curse you to your face. In verse 12, the Lord said to Satan, behold, all that he has is in your power. Only on himself, on his flesh, don't put your hand. So Satan left from the presence of the Lord. Now, this is going to cycle again in chapter 2. I don't want you to think that every bad thing that happens to you in your life is a result of some little confab between Satan and the Lord that the Lord has given permission for. Sometimes people think that this is the way everything happens. This is just telling us what happened here. And so it's here, it happens. It may be repeated often. It may never be repeated in the life of each individual believer. But don't just assume that there's been some consultation in heaven if something bad is going on in your life or somebody else's life. Because I don't believe every little thing that befalls man is a result of the devil. He is active, but not every bad thing that happens to us is a result of the devil, and it's certainly not by way of the Lord giving him permission to test people. But after this permission was granted, he came and he afflicted Job's house. Still in chapter 1, verse 13 and following. Sons and daughters were having a big party in one of the brothers' houses. In verse 14, a messenger came to Job and said, the oxen were plowing, the asses were feeding beside them, and the Sabaeans fell upon them and took them away. They've slain the servants with the edge of the sword, and I only am escaped to tell you. And so this is the first of the calamities that this has happened. The oxen and the asses have been killed. In verse 16, while he was still speaking, there came another servant and said, the fire of God has fallen from heaven, burned up all the sheep and the servants that were with the sheep, and I alone am left to tell you. So this refrain twice, I alone am left to tell you. Verse 17, while he was speaking, came another and said, the Chaldeans, which is the Babylonians, made out 3 bands, and they fell on the camels and have carried them away and slain the servants with the edge of the sword. I'm the only one left escaped to tell you. In verse 18, while he was still speaking, there came another and said, your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in the oldest brother's house. And there came a great wind from the wilderness and smote the 4 corners of the house. It fell upon the young men, and they are dead. Remember, there were sons and daughters. Apparently the daughters weren't killed, but the young guys were killed. The daughters, 3 daughters are mentioned again at the end, but they're not mentioned as being killed in this calamity. Then, verse 20, Job rose up, tore his mantle, shaved his head, fell down on the ground and worshiped. And then he made this great profession of faith after this horrible stuff. He said in verse 21, naked I came out of my mother's womb, naked I shall return. The Lord gave, the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. In all this, Job sinned not, nor charged God foolishly. Now, he was already 1 in a million with that profession of faith after what he had just gone through. An amazing, horrific series of events. By the way, has anybody ever heard that naked I came out of my mother's womb, naked I shall return, used at a funeral? I've heard that many times used at funerals. Not by me, but I've heard people use that one. The Lord has taken to comfort the remaining person, not speaking to the dead person. Bless you, bless you. If you can't get blessed here, you're in the wrong place, so bless you. Chapter 2. So we got another cycle of this business and the confab going on in heaven. Chapter 2, verse 1. Again, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord. And Satan came also among them to present himself before the Lord. The Lord asked him the same question. Where you been? Same answer. Going to and fro on the earth. In verse 3, the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job, that there's none like him in the earth? A perfect and upright man, one who fears God and eschews evil. Still, he's holding fast to his integrity, although you moved me against him to destroy him without cause. That's an interesting comment, by the way. But Satan answered and said, skin for skin. A man will give all that he has for his life. But if you put forth your hand now and touch his bone and his flesh, he'll curse you to your face. Now that's basically the same thing the devil had said to him before. He'll curse you to your face if you take away his stuff. You didn't curse him then. He'll curse you to your face if you cause sickness, essentially. So, verse 6, the Lord said to him, he's in your hand, but you may not take his life. Anything short of killing him you can do. So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and smote Job with boils from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head, so that he took pieces of pottery to scrape himself, and he sat down in the ashes. Then said his wife to him, do you still retain your integrity? Curse God and die. By the way, wives, take notice, that's not a good comment. That's not good advice. But he said, you speak foolishly, like one of the foolish women. Shall we receive good at the hand of God and not receive evil? In all this did Job not sin with his lips. And then verse 11, there's no sin yet on Job's part. Job's 3 friends, his famous 3 friends, show up in verse 11. It's Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite. And they were virtuous initially. In verse 12, when they lifted up their eyes and saw him, they didn't recognize him. He was so messed up when they came on the scene, they didn't recognize their friend. So this physical, I'll get to the physical description of this disease later, but he may have had elephantitis. Some have conjectured when you add up all the symptoms, I'll get to some more of them later. Anybody ever seen anybody here with elephantitis or pictures of it? You've seen it? Yeah. And so the skin gets cracked and horribly aged looking, swollen unbelievably, cracks in it, bleeding. It's just a horrible, horrible thing. And it ultimately will kill you. But some more description of it later. But they didn't recognize him. Whatever's going on with him, he's so messed up, they didn't recognize him. So verse 13, they sat down with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and nobody spoke a word to him, for they saw that his grief was very great. In Judaism, there's a custom called sitting Shiva, and it has to do with if you lose a family member, those that come over to the house will find the bereaved sitting on the floor for 7 days receiving guests. and it's customary that you sit with them on the floor for a little period of time, sitting Shiva to share in their mourning. So this is not what's spoken here. As I said, Judaism is not in view yet in Job. No mention of patriarchs, no mention of covenant, but the sitting Shiva custom appears here because the friends come and sit with him 7 days. And notice they didn't say anything. They just sat there and mourned with him because he had just lost his sons and a lot of other stuff, but primarily the death of his sons. In chapter 3, after this, Job opened his mouth and cursed his day. Remember, Satan said, he'll curse you, God. He didn't curse God. He never did that. Satan proved to be wrong in that prediction that Job would curse God, but he cursed the day that he was born, essentially. In verse 3, let the day perish wherein I was born, and the night in which it was said, there's a man-child conceived. Verse 11, I'm in chapter 3. Why died I not from the womb? Why did I not give up the ghost when I came out of the belly? He goes on lamenting the fact that he was born. And then in verse 25, he says this, which a lot of people have pointed to as supposedly opening the door for the devil to torment him. So verse 25 says, for the thing which I greatly feared has come upon me, and that which I was afraid of has come into me. Now notice the text does not say this opened the door to the devil. The business with the devil preceded this. So I don't know if you've ever heard it, but I've heard some of the Word of Faith camp saying that he made a profession of fear, and that opened up the realm for the devil. It's not supported by the text. And so nobody here seems to even recognize what I'm talking about, but it is. You have heard it? Okay. So you've heard it as well. Yeah, they're saying that they're speaking over themselves something bad, that the devil can work in that, essentially. So like he said, the thing I greatly feared has come upon me. So those that are in this, that believe that, say, because of his fear, he wasn't trusting God, and that opened up a room for the devil to come in and hurt him, which is silly, actually. Sounds convoluted, doesn't it?
Well, some conservatively say that it was just fear alone, not just his confession.
Yeah. But the point being, there's nothing in the text that says cause and effect. This was the cause of his problem. It's a comment.
Well, and they'll also take a scripture to support that, and they'll say life and death is in the power of the tongue.
They do. They do.
What you speak, your life is a manifestation of what you said, which is an interesting take on the whole law of attraction and name it, claim it, which is not supported entirely by scripture.
That's right. And sadly, with not all these things, but with some of what they use, it is true. You should say things in agreement with what God says, biblically. You know, that's the position we should all find ourselves in, that we're agreeing with heaven as opposed to speaking contrary to the will of God and the Word of God. So in that respect, they have a minor point. Chapter 4, Eliphaz continues speaking or begins to respond to Job. Now, Eliphaz is the first of his friends to respond. And the way I'm going to address this tonight, I'm going to get to some of the responses from all three of his friends. I'm not going to read every line of what the friends have to say. But in chapter 4, verse 6, Eliphaz speaking, is not this your fear, your confidence, your hope, and the uprightness of your ways? Remember, I pray you, whoever perished being innocent, or where were the righteous cut off? Even as I've seen, they that plow iniquity and sow wickedness reap the same. And so right off the bat, he's saying, Job, yeah, no innocent guy ever went through the stuff that you're going through. You've done something, Job, and, come clean with it. We know that there's something here bad that you've done. Reading that same little section in chapter 4, just Job 4:8 from the Contemporary English Version, it says, in my experience, only those who plant seeds of evil harvest trouble, and then they are swept away by the angry breath of God. So once again, the implication, you're reaping what you sowed, you've done something, we don't know what you've done, but we see the result of it, And this tends to be the whole track of his three friends. They're implying Job has done something dastardly that is causing all this stuff to happen. And so chapter 5, Eliphaz continues. He's given some advice. You know, what he would do, he says in verse 8, I would seek God, and unto God I would commit my cause. Duh. You know, you talk to God about your troubles. Yeah, well, I'm sure Job probably thought about that one. Verse 17, behold, happy is the man who God corrects. Therefore, don't despise the chastening of the Almighty. In other words, Job, he's just trying to get your attention and correct you for your bad behavior, your sin, your iniquity, your transgression, whatever it is that you've done. Chapter 6, Job replies, verse 2, oh, that my grief were thoroughly weighed and my calamity laid in the balances together. For now it would be heavier than the sand of the sea. Therefore my words are swallowed up. For the arrows of the Almighty are within me. The poison whereof drinks up my spirit. The terrors of God do set themselves in array against me. I'm using the King James tonight, particularly because of the language, because it's written in poetry, in original language. This is the closest we've got to kind of a poetic exposition of it. And some of the language is a little obscure, but I like the King James's rendering of it. It kind of keeps the wisdom literature poetry flowing. Verse 14, to him that is afflicted, pity should, this is Job still speaking, chapter 6, verse 14. To him that is afflicted, pity should be showed from his friend. But he forsakes the fear of the Almighty. So he's saying, you shouldn't be fussing at me, Eliphaz. You ought to be commiserating with me still. And I think the Lord agrees with him ultimately. In chapter 7, Job continues, is there not an appointed time to man upon earth? Are not his days also like the days of a hireling? Verse 4, when I lie down, I say, when shall I rise up and the night be gone? And I'm full of tossings to and fro to the dawn of the day. I just want to pause on that verse 4. Everybody here, this is a lot of Job involves his view of things that are common to man. Everybody that's ever lived has had a sleepless night, you know, for something. He's got a lot of anxiety. He can't wait for the night to get over so he can just get out of his bed, you know. Again, that's a common demand. Verse 5 gives a little bit more of the explanation of his physical problem. My flesh is clothed with worms and clods of dust. My skin is broken and become loathsome. So his skin is cracked and so forth. So there's several mentions to his physical malady, and we don't really know what it was, but it wasn't good. In verse 21 of chapter 7, and why do you, speaking to the Lord, Job speaking to the Lord, why do you not pardon my transgression and take away my iniquity? For now shall I sleep in the dust, and you shall seek me in the morning, but I will not be. I'll not be found. He's asking for mercy. Bildad's the next one up to bat, the second of Job's friends. And he's even harsher than the first guy. Verse 3, does God pervert judgment, or does God, the Almighty pervert justice? If your children have sinned against him, and he has cast them away for their transgressions, so forth. Verse 6, if you were pure and upright, surely now he would awake for you and make the habitation of your righteousness prosperous. So he's saying, obviously, your kids are dead. It's the judgment of God. It's your fault, probably. Verse 20, God will not cast away a perfect man, neither will he help evildoers. So what do you think his opinion of Job's calamity is? It's your fault. Job's reply in verse 9, or chapter 9, verse 2, I know it is so of a truth, but how should a man be just or justified with God? Verse 4, he's wise in heart and mighty in strength, who has hardened himself against him and has prospered, who removes the mountains, and they know not, which overturns them in his anger, which shakes the earth out of her place, and the pillars thereof tremble, which commands the sun, and it rises not, and seals up the stars, which alone spread out the heavens and tread upon the waves of the sea. Then he mentions several constellations, in verse 9, who makes Arcturus, Orion, and the Pleiades, and the chambers of the south. And so this is just a little side note, and it's opinion. I try to couch this in opinion as opposed to a biblical observation. But the Bible does say the stars night after night declare the glory of God. The constellations that have been utilized to make horoscopes and so forth were created for the glory of God. And they're mentioned in the scriptures. In and of themselves, they're not wicked. They're not proclaiming demonic things. They have been used to proclaim things that are not generated from heaven, but they're invented for the glory of God. So the intent of heaven was, for example, Virgo perhaps to tell the story of the virgin with child. I've heard of some cultures when first presented with the gospel and the virgin birth, they say, we know that story. We've seen it in the stars.
The Bible does say, even in Genesis, I believe, that the stars were to be for seasons and for signs, etc.
That's exactly right. So this mention of these constellations is interesting. There's a couple of mentions in Job of various constellations. Verse 32, Job still speaking on God. For he is not a man as I am, that I should answer him, and we could come together in judgment or in justice or in court. Neither is there any daysman between us or mediator that might lay his hand upon us both. And so he's actually lamenting a fact that prior to Christ, there was no mediator between God and man. So he's in a sense prophetically longing for Jesus, the God-man, to come and mediate between God and man. That's 1 Timothy 2:5. There's one mediator between God and man, the man Christ Jesus. Chapter 10, Job's still speaking. Job, my soul is weary of my life. I will leave my complaint upon myself. I will speak in the bitterness of my soul. Verse 7, thou knowest that I am not wicked, and there's none that can deliver out of thy hand. Thy hands have made me and fashioned me together round about, yet thou dost destroy me. And he's complaining to God, of course. In verse 15, if I be wicked, woe unto me, and if I be righteous, yet will I not lift up my head. I'm full of confusion, therefore see my affliction. And I can tell you, as one who has gone through a few things in my life that were not pleasant, you start to wonder, it is confusing. You go, what did I do wrong? How do I get out of this? Why isn't this getting over with? This too I think is common to man. I don't care how faith-filled you are. When when a demonic firestorm hits you and nothing is working out like you anticipated, you start to wonder, when is this going to get over? How do I get out of this? Why is this not ending? You may not question the goodness of God. I hope you don't, because that's always the wrong thing to do. He's always the answer and not the problem. But the questioning, what's going on, I think is common to man. Why is this calamity on me? I'm confused.
It's an important question. I mean, if you're endeavoring to have a sincere faith, there are some people that say, well, you just accept everything and you just ask God for the strength to get through it.
I'm not one of those that says you accept everything. Here's what I believe. I think it's okay to tell the Lord, I don't understand this. I think it's okay to tell him, Lord, I don't like this. But I don't think it's ever okay to say, Lord, I don't trust you.
I think that there's room for having a sincere conversation about that. I mean, I've been a believer for 35 years, and I have been through some horrific things where the question comes up, here's what God requires for us to do in order for things to continue to be well. And if you have a calamity of demonic activity that culminates in loss of life, tragedy, etc. And you ask the question, okay, what was this about? Was it a demonic attack? Did somebody open the door because of their sin? Because understanding some of that allows you to know how to move forward with your life.
I totally agree with what you said. Let me restate what I was saying. I end up counseling a lot of people. And where people get stuck is, I don't trust God to do what he says he'll do. And so this idea of, I don't understand, but I still trust you, has got to rise up in the believer's heart to get past these seasons. Because when you get to the place of, I don't trust you, you're basically disengaging from your relationship with the Lord. You're saying, what you say about yourself, I don't believe.
I think you can have degrees of that. I understand what you're saying, but there's a place where I've got this much faith in you because I don't understand enough. And there's so much darkness in what took place. And when I read what I understand your promises to be, and this occurrence seems to directly violate those promises, then you're placed in a situation where there's a conflict.
It happens all the time.
You begin to walk out your faith where you're saying, I want to continue to have this childlike trust in you.
So, no, I notice your language is in the form of prayer. So you are expressing some level of trust. So everything you're saying is right. There is that while you're confessing that I don't have trust, you're doing it towards God, which shows that much level of trust that you have.
So if we can put a wrapper on it, if we can put a wrapper on this segment of it.
I want you to answer this.
I don't have an answer for you. I said it's my opinion. My opinion is it's okay to say I don't like this. It's okay to say I'm confused. My opinion is it's never okay to say I don't trust you. So chapter 11, next friend, Zophar, steps up to bat. He's the third. Verse 3, should your lies make men hold their peace? When you mock, shall no man make you ashamed? Verse 6, and that he would show you the secrets of wisdom, that they are double to that which is. Know therefore that God exalts of you less than your iniquity deserves. So he's saying, Job, no matter how bad it is, you should have gotten worse.
Where did he pick these people?
He got his friends at Walmart. In 11:4 in the Contemporary English Version, 11:4 and 5, you claim to be innocent. They're in your notes, by the way. You claim to be innocent and argue that your beliefs are acceptable to God, but I wish he would speak and let you know that wisdom has many different sides. You would then discover that God has punished you less than you deserve. That's Cole. And then verse 13, in that same version, 13 and following, surrender your heart to God. Turn to him in prayer and give up your sins, even those you do in secret. Then you won't be ashamed. You'll be confident and fearless. Your troubles will go away like water beneath a bridge, and your darkest night will be brighter than noon. You will rest safe and secure, filled with hope and emptied of worry. You'll sleep without fear and be greatly respected. But those who are evil will go blind and lose their way. Their only escape is death. That's you, Job, unless you repent. So, as you said, where do they find these people?
Well, they just believed that tragedy meant that he must have sinned.
They did consistently, and if I could say this, even among Christians, that's a common thought. You did something, or this wouldn't be happening.
Your life really sucks.
You obviously did something, or this would not be happening to you. And whatever it is, you need to go ahead and confess it, get it. That's what they're saying over and over again. Chapter 12. Yes, ma'am.
Is there a biblical reason or a cultural reason why people then and people now believe that if something's happening that is bad, that it's your fault?
I think I can't answer that universally because I don't know what everybody thinks. But there is an idea of if your good outweighs your bad, things should go good for you. It's like almost a universal understanding. In other words, if your good things outweigh your bad things, you're a good person. You know. Well, sadly, a lot of Christians think that, but in reality, the only thing that goes on the other side of the scale from us is Jesus. His is the only righteousness that balances the scale, although we are supposed to behave ourselves. But this idea of calamity happening to bad people is fairly widespread. It is well, good and bad things happen to everybody.
But just reading through Proverbs today, I mean, there's so many that say, oh, good things are going to happen to the righteous people, and the wicked are going to really get it, you know, and
Half of the
it says
righteous
it
goes
so
right over
many
the
times in so many ways. So, I mean, it does kind of seem
Well,
contradictory.
You're correct. Proverbs are maxims. They're general truths. They're not absolute promises like Jesus says, I will do so and so. They're general truths. And generally, there's some truth to some of this stuff. Generally, but it's not an absolute certainty. That's the problem. Okay, so we got these three friends. We all agree when the three friends come to town, they're not very nice, right? So Job's response, chapter 12, I love this line. In verse 2, Job answers his three friends, no doubt you are the people and wisdom will die with you. I love that. That's a great line. That's a great line. I know. Well, yeah, Jewish sarcasm.
You're the only ones who know how this works. And I got them.
That's right. Friends like you, who needs enemies? So, in the contemporary English, Job said to his friends, you think you're so great with all the answers, but I know as much as you do, and so does everyone else. I've always lived right, and God answered my prayers. Now, my friends make fun of me. It's easy to condemn those who are suffering when you have no troubles. Isn't that true? So, Brother Job, chapter 13.
Now, I would have had a problem with Job's friends, because I would have found fault in myself enough to say, yeah, you're right, brother.
Job would have brought conviction with that three friends business.
No, Job's three friends would have, I would go like, you're right, brothers, I did something wrong.
Well, I don't know about you, but whenever anything is preached, I always go, it's me they're talking about. It's me, Lord. I need to go to the altar. Some people always think it's him they're talking about. You know what I mean? But for me, I'm always like, is it me? Is it me? You know I'm that way. Chapter 13. Job speaking, chapter 13. Lo, my eye has seen all of this. My ear has heard and understood it. What you know, the same do I know also. I'm not inferior to you, talking to the three guys. Surely I would speak to the Almighty, and I desire to reason with God. But you are forgers of lies. You're all physicians of no value. Oh, that you would altogether hold your peace, and it should be your wisdom. And then he goes down a little bit. He makes a profession of faith after all this. In verse 15, and it's a powerful one. Though he slay me, yet will I trust in him. Though he slay, David said the same thing. Though he slay me, yet will I trust in him. But I will maintain my own ways before him. He also shall be my salvation. For a hypocrite shall not come before him. Keeps going and ultimately says, I know that I shall be justified. So even in the midst of all this doubt, confusion, questioning, and his harassment from his friends, he's not, he's wanting to get back to a place of trust and faith in the Lord. In chapter 14, verse 1, Job still speaking, man that is born of woman is of few days and full of trouble. He comes forth like a flower and is cut down. He's fleeting also as a shadow and continues not. Verse 5, seeing that his days are determined, the number of his months are one with you. Thou hast appointed his bounds, and he cannot pass. The lifespan, of course, is in the Lord's hand. Eliphaz rears back up in chapter 15, verse 5. For your mouth utters your iniquity, and you choose the tongue of the crafty. Your own mouth condemns you, not I. Your own lips testify against you. Are you the first man that was born, or were you made before the hills? He keeps on reviling him in verse 14. What is man that he should be clean, and he which is born of a woman that he should be righteous? Job answers in chapter 16. I know I'm jumping around a little bit, but by the way, for those of y'all that came in a little bit late tonight, I'm trying to review 42 chapters of Job tonight, which is a handful. That's why I'm going a little faster than usual, because a lot of these speeches are beautiful speeches, and you absolutely ought to read them, but there's not much to say about them in a chapter. The speech, the flavor of the whole speech is kind of, trying to get a flavor of it, essentially. In chapter 16, Job once again reproaches his friends. Verse 2, I have heard many such things. Miserable comforters are you all. Shall vain words have an end? Or what emboldens you that you answer this way? I also could speak as you do if your soul were in my soul's stead or place. I could heap up words against you and shake my head at you, but I would strengthen you with my mouth, and the moving of my lips should assuage or should comfort you, your grief. Verse 20, my friends scorn me, but my eyes pour out tears unto God. Oh, that one might plead for a man with God as a man pleads with his neighbor. There's that longing again for that mediator between God and man. Bildad in chapter 18, verse 2, how long will it be that you make an end of words? Goes on to saying you're vile, you're wicked in the things that you're saying. Chapter 19, Job answers, how long will you vex my soul and break me in pieces with words? These 10 times have you reproached me. You're not ashamed that you make yourselves strange to me. Verse 6, don't you know now that God has overthrown me and has compassed me with his net? That's interesting. Verse 20, my bones cleave to my skin and to my flesh. I am escaped with the skin of my teeth. By the way, is this where the skin of the teeth thing comes from? Does anybody know? Is this where the saying comes from?
It's probably as if it's the oldest book.
Well, maybe so. The skin of the teeth. Verse 23, oh, that my words were now written. Oh, that they were printed in a book. He got that one. By the way, this is, it's not in this text, but there's a Hebrew word that's translated in English as prayer that's really to pray expressed as a wish to God. This is a wish prayer. Oh, that my words were now written. Oh, that they were printed in a book. It's interesting because he got his wish. Here it is. Another profession of faith, and this is probably Job's greatest profession of faith in the book, in verse 25 of chapter 19. For I know that my Redeemer lives, and that he shall stand in the latter day upon the earth. And though my skin worms destroy this body, yet in my flesh I'll see God. So he's believing for the resurrection of his body. Who I shall see for myself, and my eyes will behold not another, though my reins be consumed within me. So his Redeemer lives, this profession that the Messiah is living. He can express that by faith. So I see the guy going back and forth internally. He's having this horrible nightmare situation that he's trying to get through and trying to hang on to and trying to reach out to God. And everybody's telling him things that are not helping. They're just adding to his misery and confusion. But he wants to get back into a place of Lord, tell me what's going on here. Zophar, his buddy, speaks up in chapter 20, verse 4. Know thou not this of old, since man was placed on the earth, that the triumphing of the wicked is short, and the joy of the hypocrite is but for a moment. So Job, you're a hypocrite. We know it. You know it. Get over it. Job answers chapter 21. And he asks some universal questions in chapter 21. And I say they're universal questions. Maybe they haven't occurred to you, but they have occurred to many men and women in many different situations. Verse 7, why do the wicked live, become old, yea, and are mighty in power? Their seed is established in their sight with them, and their offspring before their eyes. And this is from a guy who lost everything. Their houses are safe from fear, neither is the rod of God upon them. Their bulls gender and fails not, their cow calves and cast not her calf. They send forth their little ones like a flock, and their children dance. They take the timbrel and harp and rejoice at the sound of the organ. They spend their days in wealth, and in a moment go down to the grave. Therefore they say to God, depart from us, for we desire not the knowledge of thy ways. What is the Almighty that we should serve him, and what profit should we have if we pray to him? This is a snapshot of what Jesus was talking about, the rich having a hard time entering into the kingdom of heaven. It is as difficult as a camel going through the eye of a needle. In other words, we have everything we need. Why do we need God? Job is lamenting, I'm observing people that seem to be having a better time in this life than I am, and I tried to do everything right. Why have they got it so good, and why do I have it so hard? That question is common. Verse 23, one dies in his full strength, being wholly at ease and quiet. Verse 25, another dies in bitterness of his soul and never eats with pleasure. They shall lie down alike in the dust, and the worms will cover them. Sounds a little bit like Ecclesiastes, doesn't it? Verse 34, how then comfort you me in vain, seeing your answers there remains falsehood. Eliphaz answers again in verse 5 of chapter 22, is not your wickedness great and your iniquities infinite? He's ramping up the charges. Not only is there some secret sin, there's so many they're infinite. Job, you bad guy. For you have taken, verse 6, for you've taken a pledge from your brother for nothing and stripped the naked of their clothing. He's even getting specific with the accusations. You've not given water to the weary to drink, and you've withheld bread from the hungry. Verse 9, you've sent widows away empty, and the arms of the fatherless have been broken. Therefore are these snares around about you, and sudden fear troubles you. Verse 22, this is still Eliphaz talking to Job. Receive, I pray you, the law from his mouth, and lay up his words to heart. If you return to the Almighty, you will be built up. You shall put away iniquity far from your tabernacles. Job answers again in chapter 23. Verse 2, even today is my complaint bitter. My stroke is heavier than my groanings. Oh, that I knew where I might find him, that I might come even to his seat. I would order my cause before him and fill my mouth with arguments. I would know the words with which he would answer me, and understand what he would say to me. Will he plead against me with his great power? No, but he would put strength in me. There the righteous might dispute with him. So should I be delivered forever from my judge. Verse 10, but he knows the way that I take. When he has tried me, I shall come forth as gold. So once again, he goes back to this place of trust. My foot has held his steps. His ways have I kept and not declined. Neither have I gone back from the commandment of his lips. I have esteemed the words of his mouth more than my necessary food. So Job has a lot of wonderful things to say. He has a lot of confused things too. But chapter 24, speaking of the wicked, Job speaking of the wicked, verse 9, they pluck the fatherless from the breast and take a pledge of the poor. That's what Eliphaz had accused him for, taking a pledge from the poor. They cause him to go naked without clothing, and they take away the sheaf from the hungry. Verse 13, they are those that rebel against the light. They know not the ways thereof, nor abide in the paths thereof. They rebel against the light. There's a quick story in the midst of this text. There's a place I go in Sierra Leone, West Africa, frequently called Adonkia. And it's actually, that's their Creole for I don't care. Adonkia is the name of the place. And in modern times, when they wanted to run electricity through that area, the people didn't want the electricity because of the level of witchcraft there. They equated the light coming with the electricity as something that would interfere with the spiritual darkness. This is a historical fact. So we read in the Bible about light and darkness in terms of spiritual things. They actually equated light to being contrary to the darkness of their traditional religion that they wanted to continue. By the way, Adonkia is now moving in the purposes of God and lots of good stuff going on. But that's part of their heritage. So, verse 13, they are those that rebel against the light. They know not the ways thereof, nor abide in the paths thereof. So those that are in darkness, spiritually speaking, there's actually some kind of natural darkness that facilitates some of these things. Bildad answers in chapter 25, verse 4, how then can man be justified with God? Or how can he be clean that is born of woman? Verse 6, how much less man that is a worm and the son of man which is a worm? That's a little cold. By the way, do y'all know who Nicholas von Zinzendorf was? He was the kind of, not the patron saint, but he was the patron of the Moravians. He was the German count that brought the Moravians to his estate in Herrnhut, Germany in the early 1700s. The Moravians are the ones that started the 100-year prayer movement. But he got into mysticism, and they used to have paintings of Christ, the wounds of Christ, and they would imagine themselves to be worms in the wounds of Christ. He got over it eventually, but they were trying to envision the suffering of Christ. You know the movie The Passion of Christ? They were like fascinated by the sufferings of Christ. And so they would meditate on the wounds of Christ. They would look at paintings of it, imagine themselves in the wounds, and this gross stuff. But he got over it, so never mind. Chapter 26. Chapter 26. Huh? The worms threw me off, honey. I'm sorry. Chapter 26, Job speaks again, verse 2. How have you helped him that is without power? How do you save the arm that has no strength? He goes on talking about the Lord. And then chapter 27, verse 3. All the while my breath is in me, and the Spirit of God is in my nostrils. My lips shall not speak wickedness, nor my tongue utter deceit. God forbid that I should justify you till I die. I will not remove my integrity from me. My righteousness I hold fast, and I will not let it go. My heart shall not reproach me so long as I live. In a way, what he's saying is, I'm denying y'all's charges, your three guys' charges. He is also trying to justify himself in measure, but he's saying to agree with you would be a lie, and I'm not going to agree with you, because that's just not the case. Chapter 28, Job talking about the Lord, verse 10, he cuts out rivers among the rocks. His eye sees every precious thing. He binds the floods from overflowing, and the thing that is hidden he brings forth to light. Verse 28, and unto man he said, behold, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom, and to depart from evil is understanding. That, of course, is repeated in Proverbs as well. Chapter 29, Job continues in verse 2, oh, that I were as in months past, as in the days when God preserved me. Verse 5, when the Almighty was yet with me, when my children were round about me. And he talks about how everybody treated him well and respected him. In chapter 30, this is the contrast. But now, they that are younger than I have me in derision, whose fathers I would have disdained to have set with the dogs of my flock. That's cold, Job. Verse 8, they were children of fools, children of base men. They were viler than the earth. And now I am their song. Yes, I am their byword. They abhor me. They flee far from me and spare not to spit in my face. Then he begins to speak to the Lord in verse 20. I cry out to you, and you do not hear me. I stand up, and you regard me not. Thou art become cruel to me with a strong hand. Thou oppose thyself against me. In verse 30, another description of his physical malady. My skin is black upon me, and my bones are burned with heat. I'm going to jump over a little bit. Chapter 32. So the three men ceased with their descriptions, and then another guy comes up. I want to talk about this other guy just briefly before I read some of this stuff. His name's Elihu, and after we get through to chapter 38, when the Lord shows up, the Lord has a lot of negative things to say about Job's first three friends, but he never mentions this Elihu. And I've read through Elihu's words very carefully many times, and as a couple of them I kind of can't get my arms around. But whatever Elihu has to say, by and large, a lot of it is valid. And so I'm not telling you absolutely everything the guy says is right. I don't believe it is. But I will tell you, the Lord doesn't rebuke Elihu. He rebukes the other three guys. When the Lord shows up, he never mentions this Elihu, which is interesting to me. So, verse 2, then was kindled, chapter 32, verse 2, then was kindled the wrath of Elihu. Against Job was his wrath kindled because he justified himself rather than God. That's a pretty good reason, actually. Also against his 3 friends was his wrath kindled, because they had found no answer, and yet they condemned Job. Well, that's the fact. That's exactly what they did. Verse 6, Elihu, the son of Barachel, the Buzite, answered and said, I'm very young. You are very old. Therefore I was afraid and did not show you my opinion. I said, days should speak, and multitudes of years should teach wisdom. But there's a spirit in man, and the inspiration of the Almighty gives them understanding. Verse 9, King James says, great men are not always wise. It's actually old men are not always wise. Neither do the aged understand judgment. So just because you're old doesn't mean you get wisdom to go with your age. And sadly, that's a fact. I wish it weren't, but it is. Chapter 33. Therefore, Job, I pray you, hear my speeches. This is still this Elihu speaking. Hear my speeches and hearken to my words. Verse 4, the Spirit of God has made me, and the breath of the Almighty has given me life. Verse 8, speaking about Job, surely you have spoken in my hearing, and I have heard the voice of your words, saying, I am clean without transgression. I am innocent, neither is there any iniquity in me. He goes on, then he starts to speak about God in verse 14. For God speaks once, yea, twice, yet a man perceives it not. In a dream, in a vision of the night, when deep sleep falls upon men, in slumbering upon the bed. Then he opens the ears of men and seals their instruction, so that he may withdraw man from his purpose and hide pride from man. He keeps back his soul from the pit and his life from perishing by the sword. Just a quick aside, I think that the Lord speaking in dreams is another kind of a universal thing biblically, because the Lord speaks to a lot of non-Jews in the scriptures, a lot of Jews. Other than prophetic words in the scriptures, the most common way the Lord speaks to man is in dreams. So it's interesting, this guy is saying the Lord speaks in dreams and visions, he mentions. Verse 31, mark well, O Job, hearken unto me, hold your peace, and I will speak. If you have anything to answer me, speak, for I desire to justify you. So I'm trying to help you, Job. Chapter 34, he's still speaking, verse 5. For Job has said, I am righteous, and God has taken away my justice. Verse 10, therefore hearken to me, you men of understanding. Far be it from God that he should do wickedness, and from the Almighty that he should commit iniquity. Verse 12, yes, surely God will not do wickedly, neither will the Almighty pervert judgment. Are these true statements?
So what is the answer? 11 is just the devil who did it.
I got two things. What?
So saying that that's true, then is the inference that, okay, it's just on the devil.
I don't understand your reasoning or your question. This guy is saying true things about Job, and he's saying true things about God. And so you say, what are you saying?
But then all these bad things did happen to Job.
Right.
So
He's saying, well, remember what he said about the friends. You accuse Job, and yet there's no explanation. So back to what he said about the 3 friends, chapter 32, verse 3. Also against his 3 friends, his wrath was kindled because they had found no answer, yet they condemned Job. So he's not grasping for an answer or presenting an answer. He's saying the Lord is righteous, in his comments, and you can't say the Lord is not being just and fair and righteous. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I was just saying, we went from 10 to 12, but 11 is an important verse.
Okay, for the work of man shall he render to him, and cause every man to find according to his ways. Yes, absolutely.
Right, so that's still in alignment with saying what's happened is a result of something there is a correlation between something you have or have not done and what has befallen.
Maybe so. Yeah, you could say that. I could see that easy.
So Elihu is still, he's on that line.
The jury's out on Elihu. Okay.
Right. Exactly, but he has some things that he's clearly wrong because we understand what happened.
Yeah, no, I not that particular verse hadn't jumped that at me, but a couple of things he said I question too. But the fact that you can't question, or I can't figure out, is the Lord doesn't speak negatively of what the guy had to say. So it by kind of tacit approval, it's like the Lord saying, yeah, that guy's okay, but you three are in trouble.
Could it also be that he just didn't think that it was important enough to say what he said was actually incorrect and thought it was more important to direct attention to friends? Like if he doesn't explicitly say, hey, that guy was right, you guys.
He does not say that guy was right. You're right.
Exactly. So
Yeah. So no, I'm presenting it as a bit of a conundrum. I don't understand. This guy doesn't know what happened in the courts of heaven any more than the other guys. And yet he's not admonished by the Lord for his opinions.
Well, maybe it's because the first three were actually his friends and they should have.
That's what she said. That was part of what, yeah. That's,
The other one was kind of a stranger. So,
well, let me finish with Elihu because I want to get to the Lord because he speaks for himself on all this stuff and it's pretty interesting stuff. So Elihu finishes the end of chapter 37. Verse 23 and 24, touching the Almighty, we cannot find him out. He is excellent in power and in judgment, and in plenty of justice he will not afflict. Men do therefore fear him. He respects not, any that are wise of heart. And then chapter 38, then the Lord shows up and answers Job and out of the whirlwind. And he said, who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? I love that. I love that line. Just like, miserable comforters are you all, and you're the people and truth will die with you. I love that line. Who is this that darkens counsel with words without knowledge? Verse 3, gird up your loins now like a man, and I will demand of you, and you answer me. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Declare if you have understanding. Who has laid the measures thereof? If you know, or who has stretched the line upon it? Whereupon are the foundations thereof fastened? Or who laid the cornerstone thereof? When the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy? Or who shut up the sea with doors when it broke forth, as if it had issued out of the womb? When I made the cloud the garment thereof, and the thick darkness a swaddling band for it, and broke it up from my decreed place, and set bars and doors, and said, this hereto shall you come, but no further. And here shall your proud ways be stopped. Have you commanded the morning since your days, and caused the dayspring or the dawn to know its place? So he's throwing down some stuff here pretty quick. Basically, Job, and boys, you don't know who you're messing with. Verse 16, have you entered into the springs of the sea, or have you walked in the search of the depth? Have the gates of death been opened to you? Or have you seen the doors of the shadow of death? I love that expression. By the way, this is not from this verse, but an observation. When I first started ministering full time and ended up doing funerals, I had kind of a false thing that the Lord had to work me through. And the false thing was it would be inappropriate to talk to unbelievers too hard about Jesus in their grief. That's what I thought. And the reason I thought that was I just thought it'd be rude. They're grieving, just need to let them grieve. What I didn't realize was there's something common to man around death, that there's within us, there's a natural reflection on your own humanity and your own finite nature of your life around death, that some people are open in that context that are never open any other time. And so this expression, the doors of the shadow of death, it's almost like people can feel that door that the person went through still ajar. And it doesn't last long, just a period of days, and then the door closes back. But there's a season of receptivity among people that are never receptive except around death. And so I believe now it's actually a God-given gift, I'm talking about that season, to mankind for people to consider their ways and to turn toward the Lord. That we would be doing a disservice not to point them toward the Lord. Yes, sir.
I think that's because that gives them an idea how short a time they may have left, or it helps them see that they're not invincible, that they're gonna have to.
There's a natural that, but there's a supernatural aspect to this too. There's a natural, you reflect on your own mortality around death. I think that's just a natural thing to do if you got any reason about you at all. But there's a supernatural aspect to what I'm talking about. There's some kind of opening in people's hearts around the loss of a friend or loved one that makes them receptive to the things of God in that season. And so my personal belief is not only not rude, it would be wrong not to point them to the Lord in those situations. I'm talking about unbelievers, you know. And so I've actually refused to do 2 funerals that I know of because they didn't want to talk about the Lord. One of them was her mother's.
I'm sorry, Jesus got talked about it.
Yeah, he did. Our daughter was very young, and she said, "Can I say something?" And she got up and talked all about the Lord, and then it opened the windows. Then people started testifying. But Mary's sisters didn't want anything to be said about the Lord, and I said, "I'm not the master of ceremonies. I'm not doing it," and which was not an easy thing to do because I loved her mother, but I wasn't going to do that. Anyway, back to the text. The Lord speaking. Verse 18. Have you perceived the breadth of the earth? Declare it if you know it. I love some of these statements. Verse 24. By what way is the light parted, which scatters the east wind upon the earth? By the way, whenever Job was written, they didn't know that the light, the solar and the lunar, has a great deal to do with wind. You know, this reference to wind. And the light parted, I wonder if it's a reference to diffraction of light, the spectrum of light. I don't know if it's a reference to that. Another reference to the constellations, verse 31, can you bind the sweet influences of Pleiades or loose the bands of Orion? Can you bring forth the Mazzaroth in its season? That's the constellations. Can you guide Arcturus with his sons? Do you know the ordinances of heaven? Can you set the dominion thereof in the earth? Of course, no man can. Chapter 30. And then he gives some interesting, those are the macros. He gives some micro analogies. Verse 19. Have you given the horse his strength? Have you clothed his neck with thunder? Can you make him afraid as a grasshopper? The glory of his nostrils is terrible. It's interesting he would observe the horse. Verse 26, does the hawk fly by your wisdom and stretch her wings toward the south? Does the eagle mount up at your command and make her nest on high? Chapter 40, moreover, the Lord answered Job and said, shall he that contends with the Almighty instruct him? He that reproves God, let him answer it. Then Job answered the Lord and said, behold, I am vile. What shall I answer you? I'll lay my hand on my mouth. It's a good thing to do, Job. Once I have spoken, but I will not answer. Yea, twice, but I will proceed no further. But the Lord wasn't done it with his comments. The Lord in verse 6 spoke to Job out of the whirlwind, says, gird up your loins now like a man. I will demand of you, and you will declare to me. Will you also disannul my judgment or my justice? Will you condemn me so that you may be righteous? Have you an arm like God, or can you thunder with a voice like him? Deck yourself now with majesty and excellency, and array yourself with glory and beauty. Imagine. Verse 14, then I will also confess unto you that your own right hand can save you. Then he speaks about a couple of animals, and I'm not going to belabor this too much. But these animals are not reminiscent of animals. When you break down the descriptions, I don't care how you do it linguistically, they don't sound like anything that's walking the earth today. So some people have suggested maybe there's some extinct animals, perhaps. Listen to the descriptions. Verse 15, chapter 40. Behold now the behemoth, which I made you. He eats grass as an ox. So whatever it is, it's a vegetarian, okay? His strength is in his loins, and the force is in the navel of his belly. He moves his tail like a cedar. By the way, that's a big tail. A hippopotamus has a little skinny tail. It is a vegetarian, but has a little skinny tail. Elephant has a little skinny tail. The sinews of his stones are wrapped together. His bones are as strong as pieces of brass. His bones are like bars of iron. He is the chief of the ways of God. He that made him can make his sword to approach unto him. Surely the mountains bring him forth food, where all the beasts of the fields play. He lies under the shady trees in the covert of the reed and the fens. That's a marsh. Verse 23, behold, he drinks up a river and hasten not. He trusts that he can draw up the Jordan into his mouth. He takes it with his eyes. His nose pierces through snares. So it's some kind of large animal. We have a hard time hooking him up with something that's currently around. And then he gets to one that's even more bizarre and less available, which I think gave rise to the fire-breathing dragon stuff.
So you really don't think that was a hippopotamus?
I don't think it's a hippopotamus. Not by the description. Could be, you know. Maybe they had fat tails. I don't know. Maybe there were hippopotamuses in the Jordan River with fat tails. I don't know. But listen to this description, chapter 41. Leviathan. Can you draw out Leviathan with a hook? Or his tongue with a cord? Like, can you go fishing and pull him out? Verse 3, will he make supplications to you? Will he speak soft words to you? Will he make a covenant with you? Will you take him for a servant forever? Will you play with him as with a bird? Or will you bind him for your maidens? Verse 9, behold, the hope of him is in vain. Shall not one be cast down even at the sight of him? None is so fierce that dare to stir him up. Who then is able to stand before me? Who has prevented me that I should repay him? He continues with the description of Leviathan. Verse 14, who can open the doors of his face? His teeth are terrible round about. His scales are his pride. That word scales in verse 15, it's actually shields. I guess they didn't know what else to put, so they put scales. His scales are his pride, shut up together as with a close seal. So he's got, let's just go with, it's got, whatever it is, it's got, like fish has scales. It's got some kind of thing layered, like armor.
Crocodiles have that?
No. Verse 15, his scales are his pride, shut up together as with a close seal. One is so near another that no air can come between them. But they're separate, but no air can come between them. They're joined one to another. They stick together so that they cannot be sundered or split apart. By his nestlings a light does shine, and his eyes are like the eyelids of the morning. Out of his mouth goes burning lamps, and sparks of fire leap out. Of his nostrils goes smoke, as out of a seething pot or a cauldron. Doesn't that sound like a fire-breathing dragon? His breath kindles coals, and a flame goes out of his mouth. In his neck remains strength, and sorrow is turned to joy before him. The flakes of his flesh are joined together. They are firm in themselves. They cannot be moved. Folds of his flesh. This is some kind of wild creature. Verse 27, he esteems iron as straw, and brass as rotten wood. The arrow cannot make him flee. Sling stones are turned with him into stubble. Darts are counted as stubble. He laughs at the shaking of a spear. Verse 31, he makes the deep to boil like a pot. He makes the sea like a pot of ointment. He makes a path to shine after him. So it's some kind of sea creature. Sea monster. One would think of the deep to be hoary. The earth there is not his like. Upon the earth there is not his like, who is made without fear. He beholds all high things. He's a king over all the children of pride. Whatever this description is, it's not a whale. You know, it's not of this, it's not of that. Whatever it is, we don't have one of those at the zoo in D.C. I don't think he's a crocodile, but maybe. I don't think that works either. A fire-breathing...
You sound like a turtle to shell.
So if Job
maybe.
was,
A Ninja Turtle. What?
if Job was pre-Noah, then those,
Job wouldn't have been pre-Noah. But he could have been...
are you sure?
Well, there wasn't supposedly there wasn't writing pre-Noah. I guess he could have been, because it could have gone down oral tradition.
Because those animals could have.
So it could have been dinosaurs extinct or something.
Those dinosaurs could have disappeared in the flood.
But didn't Noah take one of every single animal?
Apparently, he missed the unicorns. I know, I'm just playing with you. I don't know. I don't know what this guy is. Don't know if Job, from the sound of him, he'd have filled up the whole boat by himself.
The behemoth would have been too big for the boat.
Noah didn't take any of the sea creatures.
That's right. That's true.
Didn't take any of the sea creatures. Well, you know, there's Loch Ness.
Nessie. This is Nessie.
We don't have any good photographs of this.
That's right. That's because he's always smoking it up with his fire-breathing breath. Chapter 42. Let's finish this.
There's a legend, I think, maybe Irish or Scottish, that the Loch Ness Monster keeps like a chimney underneath the water.
Oh, really?
Fish for a woman that had long ago.
Well, let's don't go with the Loch Ness Monster. Let's stay with the chapter 42 of Job. Then Job answered the Lord and said, I know that you can do everything, and that no thought can be hidden from you. Who is he that hides counsel without knowledge? Therefore have I uttered that I understood not, things too wonderful for me, which I knew not. Hear, I beseech you, and I will speak. This is the Lord speaking. I will demand and declare thou to me. And then Job, verse 5. I have heard of thee by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees you. Wherefore I bore myself and repent in dust and ashes. And so that's the confession of faith, if you will, with Job. In verse 7, it says, after these words, the Lord spoken these words to Job. The Lord said to Eliphaz the Temanite, my wrath is kindled against you and against your two friends. Notice he doesn't get the fourth guy. For you have spoken to me the thing that is not right, as my servant Job has. Therefore, take 7 bulls and 7 rams, and go to my servant Job, and offer up for yourselves a burnt offering, and my servant Job shall pray for you. For him I will accept, lest I deal with you after your folly, in that you have spoken of me the thing which is right, or not spoken of me the thing which is right, like my servant Job. So Eliphaz the Temanite and Bildad and Zophar went and made sacrifice, and the Lord accepted them. In verse 10, the Lord turned the captivity of Job when he prayed for his friends. Also the Lord gave Job twice as much as he had before. And verse 12, the Lord blessed the latter end of Job more than his beginning, for he had 14,000 sheep and 6,000 camels and so forth. Verse 13, he had 7 sons and 3 daughters, had 3 daughters before. Verse 16, after this Job lived 140 years. Saw his sons, even 4 generations. So Job died being old and full of days. And so let me put a little wrapper on this.
Notice he didn't give Job a new wife.
He didn't give Job the explanation of chapter 1 and 2. He didn't give Job, this is what really happened here. He never did all that. He said, who are you to question me for what's befallen you? So Job didn't get the clarity that you and I have looking at this. But here's what I want to give you for a takeaway. The devil made Job miserable. God made him whole. The devil, for whatever means he got there, made Job miserable. The Lord restored Job. My friend Michael Brown has written a commentary on the book of Job. He estimates that this thing took 11 months, but it's less than a year, the calamity of Job, from the context of the languages. He lived 140 years after this. So I'm saying this for a reason. Every now and again, I'll run across somebody that's suffering some sickness. It's usually a physical sickness. And they say, I'm enduring the suffering of Job. If that's true, they should expect to get healed and have a redemptive end to it. In other words, if somebody wants to proclaim themselves a Job, they got to buy into the whole picture. There's an end to it, and there's a redemption that comes. So they still should be looking for healing and redemption, not just be dug in on their sickness as this is my lot in life. You can't get all of your theology about healing from the book of Job. You can't get all of your theology about the sovereignty of God from the book of Job. My limited understanding is we have these 66 books together, which paint a more full picture of what our understanding of God is. But this initial glimpse at the Lord and what happened with the story of Job is fascinating because there are some universal aspects to it. As I said before, the one where you must have done something to deserve this is very common. Yes, ma'am.
I just picked up on the fact that when God was talking to the three friends, he said, you didn't speak about me correctly like Job did. But they were attacking Job the whole time. I don't remember them saying anything bad about God.
They were saying that God
Did it to him.
God did this to you because you did something wrong.
But God
That was
didn't
not the
do it.
case.
God didn't do it to Job.
Well, no, wait, I think he did.
No, he let the devil do it.
Exactly. If you let somebody, I mean, reading the text, it looks
He
like to a
allowed it,
certain
but he
extent,
didn't.
God kind of encouraged Satan to challenge.
It's almost like he pointed him out. Have you considered my servant Job? Yeah, I know. Have you considered my servant Job being a righteous man? Like, hey, take a shot at this guy. I know, I've thought about that.
Explicit permission to do these horrible things to go in his household, because he did.
Well, he didn't delineate every little detail. He just said, you can't kill him.
Right.
You can't kill him.
Part of the question that comes, if you're looking at it is, one, do we look at this literally or allegorically? And that's always an interesting conversation when you're talking about the Bible. But then also, what does that initial conversation between God and Satan tell us about the nature of the relationship that God has to Satan and what that portends for us in this cosmic conflict?
That's a whole package deal, and it is one that I've chewed on a lot. But there's this. It goes in, from my pigeonholing, it goes with the whole council of heaven theology. There are various places where the Lord sits in a council of beings and makes decrees. Just quickly,
Like the statement he made in the beginning of Job about the sons.
the sons of God is a.
Interesting that Satan was amongst the sons when they came to.
So 1 Kings 22.
God created him.
So first Kings 22, probably a better place would be to go to Zechariah. Let's go to Zechariah. But first, mark 1 Kings 22. The council of heaven appears there with Micaiah and the death of, 1 Kings 22 is the death decreed in the council of heaven for Ahab and the plan for how to do it. But go to Zechariah. Zechariah 3 is one that's fascinating with the council of heaven. I wasn't going to go there, y'all, but there's dozens of these scriptures. This is where I pigeonholed the first two chapters of Job. So Zechariah chapter 3, verse 1. He showed me Joshua the high priest standing before the angel of the Lord, and Satan standing at his right hand to resist him. And the Lord said to Satan, the Lord rebuke you, O Satan, even the Lord that has chosen Jerusalem rebuke you. Is not this a brand plucked out of fire? So Zechariah is seeing all this. Joshua was clothed with filthy garments and stood before the angel. He answered and spoke to those that stood before him. So there's another group. Take away the filthy garments from him. And unto him he said, behold, I've caused your iniquity to pass from you. I'll clothe you with a change of raiment. I said, Zechariah interacts with these supernatural beings in the vision. I said, let them take a fair mitre, set it upon his head. So they set a fair mitre on his head, clothed him with garments, and the angel of the Lord stood by. So we got the angel of the Lord, we got Zechariah, we got Joshua, we got a bunch of people standing around. Verse 7, thus says the Lord of hosts, if you will walk in my ways, if you keep my charge, then you will also judge my house, and shall also keep my courts, and I will give you places to walk among these that stand by. This is the courts of heaven. Verse 8, hear now, O Joshua, the high priest, you and your fellows that sit before you, for their men wondered at. They're actually men to come. For behold, I will bring forth my servant the branch, which is a Hebraic reference to the Messiah in the Old Testament. This has to do with the branch. And so this is the courts of heaven stuff is way too far to go with no time left on the clock. But it's a whole series of scriptures. And so the sons of God, this transaction that happens with Job, it is unique, but it's not the only view behind the curtain. That 1 Kings reference, chapter 22, is another one. It's very perplexing what takes place in that one. Because the Lord decrees the death of Ahab, then he says to the council of heaven, how are we going to do it, boys? And they offer suggestions. And so he goes to one, yeah, that'll work, let's do that. Okay, Lord, we thank you. You look perplexed.
I am extraordinarily confused. There's a whole lot of information I don't have. I have a whole lot of questions.
We'll stay after. We'll stay after and talk. Lord, we bless you. We thank you. Appreciate you, Lord. Thank you for the book of Job. Next week, we're looking at the first section of Psalms, the first book of the Psalms of 5 books. In Jesus' name, amen.
When did they say Job was written? I mean,
They don't say, but they think the story played out between 2000 BC and 1500 BC.